Welcome to part 2 of our Introduction to LeaderWARE at Flow Adult Development Program. If you missed part 1, you may listen in at leadu.info/leaderware/part 1. Below the part 2 video is a link to the slides Mike used in the video. To gain the greatest benefits from our LeaderWARE at Flow Adult Development Program, you may want to consider joining Mike's Inner Circle membership at Flow. You may learn more at livingatflow.com/inner circle. If you have any comments or questions for Mike, you may send them to support@leadu.info. And now, here's Mike with part 2.
Hello, this is Mike J., and welcome to our introduction to LeaderWARE at Flow. For those of you that are unfamiliar with my last book, At Flow, we're going to provide that as sort of a backdrop or some resources for you to be able to get a picture of the entire model. It's not necessary. Just remember one thing, that everyone is good at some things and not so good at other things, and the idea has been in the past to spend a lot of time working on the things we're not so good at and spend less time working in areas where we're good. And what we're doing at Flow is we're sort of reversing that logic. We're identifying those things we're not very good at, and then we're getting help with them. We're reaching out to others. We're scaffolding those, but spending a significant amount of time where we can make larger contributions. We learn faster, develop more refined skills, those kinds of things like that. So the idea of LeaderWARE is to present you with a toolkit at Flow with which to begin this process of individual and organizational development. Let's start out with this quote. A living system is dynamically organized to do work to modify its own organization with respect to interactions with its own environment. This may seem like a fairly complex way to say that we are adaptive much more closely to how we're wired if we get some help. And the idea is help comes in the form of feedback. Help comes in the form of reaching out to others. Help comes in the form of scaffolding. In other words, helping us hold up those parts of ourselves and the organization that are under serious load and from time to time need extra help. So the idea would be is to configure development around this kind of central idea. I just want to refresh you. In the intro to the intro, I basically said there are two problems that we're basically trying to solve aside from our ability to produce profitably and ecologically in the future. The relationship between human capabilities and task demands is proving to be a pretty large bridge to cross. And so we're trying to find ways in which to scaffold that gap. The second thing is that we know that we can get significant bang for the buck by putting together customized individual development portfolios, and that's the area, if we can catalyze that, where the greatest return to investment as well as results often occurs, especially when that's coupled with training programs and skill development, and of course coaching initiatives and organizational interventions, culture change over time. In terms of this model of self-awareness, I mentioned in the intro that there's a real key to understanding this that most self-awareness advocates do not put forward, and that is the idea that self-awareness is the linchpin to both social awareness and self-management, and those dictate the amount of relationship management potential that exists, and that then therefore leads to the positive impact on others. Well, let me show you some research. This research is not well known, but it's very important. I ran across it maybe 2 decades ago, and it was done in the area of trying to understand, if we get this self-awareness stuff, what chance do we have of promoting self-management? And you'll notice in the graph itself that with self-awareness, we get pretty high levels of self-management. Without it, we get almost none. And that's the important thing to understand. In self-awareness and social awareness, if we have self-awareness, then we can have social awareness to a larger extent. If we don't have self-awareness, there's very little chance that we'll have social awareness, and basically social awareness as well as self-management are allocated to those people who have this wired-in potential for it versus developing skills in an environment to where they need it for adaptation. So those are important things. Self-awareness is really important. However, the problem is that in large part self-awareness is hardwired in. And that's why that I created this formula, which has been much more leveraging in terms of creating leader awareness, and that is the pathway of utilizing self-knowledge. Let me briefly explain why. If self-awareness is hardwired, in other words, the potential for it is different in all people, then how do we get the most of it if we can't tell how much people have and it's different in everyone? Well, the idea would be is if we help people with self-knowledge, the resultant would be self-awareness to the extent that that's available. And then when we add the system in, we promote a concept of leader awareness, which gives us leverage using self-knowledge as well as self-awareness, but the idea of other awareness, which then becomes important to the leader. So with that as a backdrop, what we're going to do is look at two basic systems of leader awareness. Now, again, I want to keep this simple so that you understand where we're going with this process. Because it's such a leveraging process, it's important to be simple enough that everyone can understand it. The idea is that we're looking at two basic systems as a leader. No matter what level you're at, you're looking at two basic systems. And that is performance now and the ability to perform over time. Covey did a great job of explaining this as productive capacity and potential productive capacity in the books that he wrote, everything from First Things First to Leadership Effectiveness, those kinds of things like that. And the idea here is that as a leader, we want to be aware simultaneously of our ability to perform now and what we are doing in the system to be able to create ability to perform in the future, whether it's individual or organizational. I basically look at performance and development in three ways. Working in the system, which is important as far as execution and performance. Working on the system, which makes the system itself better over time to be more adaptive, flexible, meet those VUCA conditions we talked about. And then working of a system, which is basically a generative approach that I've tried to talk about for about 2 decades as generati. In other words, the idea of literati being those people who use literature to make the Enlightenment, and the idea of generati using generativity and how do you create that. So those are kind of the backdrop ideas of performance and development. What I intend to do is to create a portfolio of development that allows a focus on development. At the same time, by focusing on a development, we optimize performance. So the program that I'm selling to you and that I'm helping you understand how to sell to your subordinates or other people is that the way to get better now and over time is to focus on development, not let development slip so far into the background that we only deal with it 1 or 2 times a year in either a performance review or a check-in with a manager or a manager once removed. So if we accept this premise that we are dynamically organized to do work to modify our own organization with respect to interactions with our environment, that means that we can work on ourselves. And we're going to talk about this process called metacognition in our next series of programs. What do we need to know? What skills do we need to develop? What are the tools we need to engage in the work? How do we do it? And who do we need to be, do, have, become, and contribute in the process? So that's the focus. That's the idea. Here's the system that I've put together. Again, trying to frame this so that it's simple but no simpler, so that we can use it throughout the 7 or 8 different levels of management training and development. Now, in this particular case, is just a couple of pages of quotes here. This basically, the idea is that no one is necessarily born with some set of universal characteristics or traits. Any person who is motivated to want to lead can actually begin to lead utilizing the understanding that is built into this particular approach. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is that no one is going to take responsibility for your development. Now, in enlightened organizations, or awakened business as I call it, they're going to put together programs for you, or conditions by which you have the opportunity to develop yourself, whether it's career path, whether it's succession related, whether it's training and development, whether it's coaching, leadership opportunities, those kinds of things like that. But essentially, one of the things that you have to get clear on, whether you're working with leaders or are a leader yourself, no one is going to take responsibility for your development. You must become an advocate of your own development, and therefore must begin to put together your developmental plan. So if you're a single individual looking at this program, or you're a person who works with individuals in training, mentoring, organizational behavior and development, HR, those kinds of things, we need to get across to people that development is their responsibility, and they must become accountable for their own development. It's just like no one tells you to bring a PDA or to do your work. You have to do that yourself. Development is the same thing. So the idea would be, if we're going to try to give you a program that develops skills so that you over time can utilize the enhanced self-knowledge to bring about whatever self-awareness you have the potential for, to create this idea of leadership awareness, then what we want to do is we want to embed whatever we're going to do as a program with development. And so we want to work on the system, and we want to become of the system. Literally, to become generative, you must become of the system of development. And the idea is that we want to improve the decision making on the ground. We want to get improvements in productivity and performance, and we want return on investment, because nobody can afford to waste scarce resources. So here are the assumptions. In most companies, there is an ongoing annual review process as a part of company policies. This is consistent around the world. Anyone who wants to be any kind of company, and even what we're seeing in terms of entrepreneurial startups that are fast moving, there is still some kind of annual review process as a part of company policy. So that already exists out there. Most of the policies, directly or indirectly, dictate that the employees have a developmental plan as part of the company policy. So far, all we're doing is piggybacking on a structure that already exists. Now, where it begins to get fuzzy is that people confuse the annual performance review with development, and they are different things. And so what we're beginning to try to understand is, if you're going to build a leadership framework, if you're going to look at LeaderWARE, if you're going to look at leader position or anything else in the process, you've got to understand how to embed the development portfolio of planning, individual and organizational development, in a performance related system. That's key, because the two, strategy and execution, the two, productivity, and the results that come from them, are always put together. They're always coupled. And so we want to couple performance and development. We do not ever want to get so far away into developmental theory that we lose the traction that we can get in day-to-day performance. So what we're going to do is basically, we want to start with these goals. We want to improve performance in time. This is not something that we're going to say, hey, it's going to take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, as often developmental changes and transitions take. We're going to say this is going to begin to improve your performance now. Okay? Now, as a part of this process, we are going to build capacity to perform over time. In other words, we want to fly a plane while we're building it, at the same time make sure the plane gets where it's going. All right? Create language for leading adult development, which shifts the focus of our decision making from horizontal to vertical development. Now, we're going to talk more about that as we get deeper into the program. But most models of performance today do not take into consideration what we have learned over the past 50 to 60 to 70 years about the way adults develop. So part of the process, and now when we begin to frame this by design at Flow, we want to scaffold performance and development by embedding the adult development learnings that we have and the skills that come from that into whatever framework of leadership that we have. So again, starting with what's there, beginning to piggyback on that, scaffolding the development into the performance process so that we deny the skeptics the opportunity to say that we're just wasting money on flu or touchy-feely programs and begin to get results in real time. Adult development embedded in any kind of leadership framework. And here's how it works. It exposes leaders to the formal adult developmental models. Now, obviously, we're not going to make you a developmentalist, but at the same time, we want to begin to show you some basic tenets of what the adult developmental models say, because most of it is counterintuitive in terms of what we really know about how people develop, both consciously and unconsciously. We want to inform leaders how adults develop aspects of their leadership decision making as they grow, learn, and develop as adults. The key thing is this. If what we're doing here doesn't give the person leverage immediately, then whatever we're not doing enough. We want to understand the differences between horizontal and vertical development, and you will see me introduce a concept of transitional development called oblique development, which has been around but not written about much. That's very important. So we're going to talk about horizontal, oblique, and vertical development and how it happens and what we can do as leaders to become aware of how the adult development process actually gives us leverage in terms of improving productivity and results. We want to use the embedding of leadership decision-making differences to provide support for changes in leadership behavior consistent with now, near, and far requirements in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous set of conditions. So again, the backdrop is VUCA. We understand that things are becoming complex, and they're becoming complex in an accelerated fashion. And then we want to begin to understand that that's creating gaps. We want to begin to know how to scaffold those gaps, begin to make sure that the amount of pressure that accelerating complexity is putting on the system for adaptiveness does not weigh us down or create bottlenecks or crash the system. And we want to begin to look at this whole concept of well-being and happiness in the background. In other words, the reason I contextualize this program at Flow, but I'm not speaking much about it right now, is it's like an operating system. Right now, I'm using PowerPoint. It runs on Windows. I don't know anything about Windows coding, but I know something about PowerPoint. I can use PowerPoint to run on a system that I know nothing about, even though the system helped me run PowerPoint. That's what @Flow does. @Flow versus blank slate, the idea that anybody can do anything and we should start everybody out with a blank slate, and if they don't learn, they're lazy, not ambitious, or something's wrong with them. That sort of make-wrong model is being replaced by a make-right model, which says, hey, we all have different ways of doing things. Let's begin to look at these ways, understand these ways in the context of the whole, and then begin to look at how we can use that for adaptive behavior instead of spending so much time working on weaknesses. All right, the current process. Well, within the current system, again, we've talked about that. Usually there's an annual review process. Usually there are managers trying to manage subordinates, and they hate it because it involves all these things around developing and all these things that we don't like to do. We just like to do what it is we don't want to do. And so we create this formal review process that's like pulling teeth every year. It's almost like when you talk to people about reviews, it's like talking about going to the dentist. All of us put it off as long as we possibly can. We know it's going to hurt, and we don't want to do it. Whereas if we had a developmental system in place, it would become much easier, and part of that process is to create the language with which we can talk to people about development without it seeming like it's pulling teeth. We're going to use the current process. This is what I'm going to teach you through the whole program. We're going to use the current process. We're going to scaffold that process of change. We're going to teach you to think about your thinking and what's involved in that. We're going to teach managers how they can coach and train their subordinates by just using the subtle language of adult development, which we're going to teach you about, which I'm already teaching you about now. And then we're going to look at how that is a way for us to begin to deal with performance issues, to begin to deal with development, succession, all the different promotion types of things that are consistent with any type of leadership framework. And we're going to show that adult development can be a linchpin in the whole process of people becoming more happy and successful at Flow. Now, here's part of what I do. This is just What I'm going to show you in the next few slides is how you would approach this. If you're looking at this as an implementation tool, or how do you learn this and add it to your coaching practice, or how does it become part of your management philosophy, basically there's sort of an easier way to introduce this. And the way to do it would be to just take it into group process led by a champion, someone who says, teach me about this, and while you're teaching me about this, can I bring some of my folks along to be with me during this process? And essentially, this is what happens. We open it up to a group process, make it as painless as possible, and what you want to begin to model. Now remember, the whole process of metacognition is understanding that you want to model subconsciously what you want consciously. So the idea of bringing people in about 4 times a year, it's a good idea for development. Once a quarter in the American system, the Western system, works very well along the lines of measurement and those kinds of things. We're going to add whatever the content is. In this case, we're going to look at about 5 developmental models that make up the crux of the capability dynamics. We're then going to take and stage some individual sessions. Again, this is what you want to do. About 4 times a year, the manager wants to bring in the person and only talk about development, not cover performance issues. Those are done in other ways. We want to talk about development. We want to review development, and we want to begin to position the person for their developmental supplement. In other words, the idea of sitting the person down and saying, tell us about what happened to you this year developmentally and performance-wise, so that I can use that information when I review you. Okay, it's called a developmental supplement. The idea would be is you'd want a performance supplement, which you'll have in the way of measurements, metrics, all kinds of did you finish your goals, the tasks, all that sort of thing. But you also want to say what was happening to the person during this process, and how do we begin to map the process in terms of this overall approach. So what I'm showing you now is a process that I'm actually using to help people begin to implement this into their managerial leadership system. And then, of course, during the year, we usually add some type of cognitive style assessment or leadership decision-making assessment. And the idea would be there is, here's how I think I'm doing, and here's what somebody who assesses this formally outside of my thinking thinks I'm doing. And using those two to understand the gap between here's where I think I am and here's where I may be showing that I am is a very important part of the feedback process. In terms of benefits, what benefits do we get for implementing this kind of process or using this in our coaching practice or using this as a manager? Well, the first thing that you want to understand is that we're after a return on investment. We know that there are scarce resources that you have to put into the development of your people, and therefore we've got to get a lot of bang for the buck. That bang for the buck usually comes from increased productivity. Productivity in all realms, being happier, being successful, producing more widgets, having organizational climate improve, all those types of things go into this idea of increased productivity. The other thing that we want to do is we want to begin to integrate development into daily performance. Don't wait until tomorrow to develop the skills that you need for tomorrow. Start developing the skills, the attitude, the climate that you need tomorrow today. In order to do that, you have to do it today. Small, tiny increments of development each day. I'm talking about minutes in respect to the overall 1,440 that we have in 24 hours. Minutes a day of using a program like this can have huge accumulative compound benefits over time. The problem is it's like going to the dentist. We just don't do it because we've learned that it's painful. And it doesn't need to be painful, and what we need to do is we need to embed this process in the idea of performance so that it becomes less painful. You need to give the context and language for developmental conversations. The biggest problem that I see with people giving developmental feedback is they do not know how to couch it in a way that is not about the person per se, but about the behavior that's occurring, allowing the person to work with you in object with their own behavior. Because we make it about them, we personalize it, people personalize it, and we get into an issue to where it's very painful. Providing scaffolding and support for individual change. We know that those developmental portfolios give us the greatest bang for the buck in terms of return on investment and our results. So that's something that we want to scaffold. We also want to scaffold and support for any type of talent gearing, succession, role calibration, anything that people are doing across the company that begins to look at and say, here's a set of skills that are here, here's a set of skills that are over there. Are they similar skills? And this helps us begin, especially in HR, to begin to understand, well, listen, this person is getting this kind of experience now. If they got this kind of experience over here, is that the right thing for their career? Or is it the same kind of experience they just got with different content? Well, if that's the case, then developmentally, they're not going to grow. So we want to look for ways in which we can give people different developmental experiences, which can then help them work through the many different aspects of who they are and their talent. We want to improve the use of self-knowledge in the pursuit of self-awareness because we know that we can scaffold leader awareness. And of course, we're going to do it with 7 dynamics. The idea being is that each area of focus helps us build skills in a particular area that's important for leadership awareness. Now, one of the things that we talk about is time orientation in development. Basically, the past or before now is a developmental orientation that we can use in the language of working with people in development. So we can talk about things that have occurred in the past, behavior that's occurred in the past, and we can look back at that and we can make it objectively. And then we can begin to look at the time frame of now. These time frames are important because you want to understand that development, as well as building performance over time, takes time. And therefore, we don't want to confuse the person with their goals, because now goals, usually within this next, between the time we see you in this review and the time we see you 90 days later, we can talk about things that you can begin to try or attempt to do. The same thing with near, when we look at that annual performance process, which is usually about a 6 to 18 month process, where you will, if you are embedding development in the process, you will get a measurable transition in the person's cognitive development. And that's important too. Most companies today, if you walked into their HR system or their leadership system and you said, do you have a plan in place to not only measure but improve the cognitive development of your people every 6 to 18 months, they would look at you like you're nuts. And yet that frame, that 6 to 18 month, that near frame, is a frame that every company should be working within. It's couched in that annual review process, the lead up to and the post period for developmental transitional cognitive growth. And then, of course, the far change is, hey, here's where you're headed, and over a period of time where you'd like to be. But on the way, there are some steps, there are some transitions, and we can plan those out over a period of 5 review periods to where you can begin to look at cognitive growth in particular areas. And here's what you're going to need as a result. You're going to need challenges here. You're going to need scaffolding here. You're going to need opportunity here. You're going to need options here. Well, we can do this with a great degree of specificity when we include the developmental process. But until we get the language, then we do not know what's going to take place in that process. Now, basically what I did here is I just showed you a sample, the 2015 dates, and basically just showed you a spaced repetition, that's what it is, spaced repetition over a period of time where you have touch points that you create, where you bring people in, expose them to a process, allow them to come into a process with the manager, and the manager wants to remove as a part of this process, and begin then to frame up the journey to the dentist, so to speak, making it easier on them in the process of 4 meetings during the year. The focus of the individual sessions, remember I said group sessions, then do some individual sessions. The reason that you want to do that is you want to stage the review process or the sessions that are going on to get the developmental supplement in place so it's actually written over the course of a year rather than in the 20 minutes before it's due. And that's the idea there, is just to add pieces, add bullet points, add thinking. And again, what does it do? Metacognition. Adds to the thinking of thinking in the process. Okay, and then what I'm going to leave you with is this optional leadership awareness exercise. And basically, it's a baseline. Every one of us, if I were giving you a word and I said, write 25 to 50 to 250 words about your capability now, you would write about that. Bias. Do you have any biases? What are your biases? What is your style? What is your leader style? What level of leadership do you think that you're working with? What's your role like? Describe your role. Describe what your role is doing for you. Look at your values. What are your values and how are they? And look at the overall system that you're in. Every one of us could sit down without any studying, without anything, and we could put on a piece of paper what we think about each one of those things in our terms. And that's what this exercise offers you, just to put it in your terms. Because what we're going to do over the course of the year in teaching you how to create a developmental supplement, we're going to begin to start to track how you think about capability, bias, your leader style, the level at which you're currently functioning now or able to function in the role that you're in with the values that you have in the system that's creating conditions for all of these processes. So that exercise is just a way to begin to set a baseline, to get a starting point. It's not right or wrong. It can never be right or wrong. Development can never be right or wrong because development is what it is. And that's what we're trying to do. What is it that it is what it is? And is it changing or evolving or adapting or flexible over a period of time? So that's the intro. We'll start to get into the meat of the work where we talk about metacognition in the next system, which is thinking about our thinking and how we begin to utilize metacognition in the whole idea of performance and development in time and over time. So I hope you'll join us. Come back and see us. And if you have some comments or ideas about what you've learned here, just drop them to me. I have an email address that will be made available to you in the process, and just drop me a note. Whether you liked it, whether I could have improved this or I could have done that. And you might want to write, and we'll use a wrapper in this process, and just tell me, well, what did you learn from this? What did you take away from this? What was your takeaways in terms of this particular presentation? And that gets us started back into the whole concept of metacognition, which we'll take up in the next program.